Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Pragmatic Anarchist podcast with Mohawk Joey. And I've got a guest on here today, Charles House. Say hi, Charles.
Hello.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about why I brought you on the show here today, Charles?
I guess to condense it down, I've applied to roughly 1,000 jobs in the last month.
That is a lot. My experiment was 60. And what actually inspired you to do this?
I've seen people compare my effort to a YouTuber that did this, where he applied to 1,000 jobs just to see what the responses were. But that man was not using his real resume and or name, and he was not seeking a job. He was just looking to data mine from that experiment, which is perfectly cool. This was me in my real life seeking a job. I had worked at my previous position for about 8 years. When I started that job, I was in my 20s, and everything that I had done before that was a job that I held for, a year, a few years, whatever. And it was close to the minimum wage, or close to the minimum wage now, since it's raised a bit since. Certainly close to the minimum wage in my city. I live in Washington, D.C. Now I'm more experienced, and I kind of generally know what I'm doing, and I have things to show for myself. And the people who have seen my resume and responded, real human beings that saw my resume and responded, said that, I know what I'm doing. And the phrase that I've heard multiple times was that my resume speaks for itself. I don't really have to embellish or use the kind of language that I think people expect to use in a resume. It just
You sort of the language you rely on, right? Like the way we were taught, the flowery, poof it up, like, okay, you shoveled shit, but I was a waste pro, or
yes,
whatever.
yeah.
Something you had just said that I wanted to touch on. You said the humans that actually got to see your resume, and that's something I experienced as well. When I show people my resume, and from my experiment in the place, anyone that's sat down and spoken to me, they're like, "Oh yeah, you could totally, 5 minutes in a room with me. Obviously, I'm qualified to work at a McDonald's, right?" But you're saying you weren't just qualified for that. You are. This is not your first time into the job market. You've been at a job for 10 years. The couple of other jobs you did, you stayed at them for a few years. So you're not out there bouncing around and partying through your 20s. You sat down and buckled down and did the job. And then this was where you let go of your other job from pandemic complications, or what caused you to do this, sir?
Not to give too much information, but due to some current events, our office unexpectedly closed entirely.
Okay.
We had about 80 people in my office. We were a global organization. And, so hundreds of people in total. But yeah, just one day we came in and they were like, we can no longer function.
That happened to tons of Americans and people around the world during the last 2 years throughout COVID and spikes and all that. But so yours, I'm going to guess, is having to do with the recent international conflicts and such. And that's unfortunate. And there's a lot of issues surrounding that, because this is and in my view, like, if we just all worked on getting along a little better, we wouldn't have these issues. And that gets to where, with the employment thing, when you do talk to a person, right, you said it's good. Now, of the interviews where you got to talk to people, like, what was that around percentage wise? You said you're not done with the numbers yet, but like, if you give me a guesstimate, like, how many humans did you get to talk to out of these 1,000 applications?
So funny enough, since I started putting this article together, I currently have 1,125 individual correspondences, so emails or email chains about different jobs. Most of those, the vast majority of those, are confirmations of a receipt of my resume. Somebody, an automated email saying, "We got your resume, we'll get back to you." Some of those are denials, automated denials mostly, that just say, we're looking for someone with more experience. And maybe 24 of those are people speaking to me. And in that number that I gave, if I speak to someone 10 times, it only counts as one in my metrics. So I've spoken to each of these people 5 to 10 times, but they only count in that metric as one correspondence.
Okay.
And I've done, when I stopped counting, which was a few days ago, I had done 15 interviews total. Most of them were Zoom. 2 of them were in person. However, I'm still getting them today. I came home tonight and I have, I think, 5 requests for interviews of various kinds. But
Okay. And when did you start doing this?
oh, well, I mean, I guess I applied to a few before my office closed down because I kind of saw the
Always
writing on the
looking
wall.
for something different anyway. Is it, maybe the place, what it sounds like, if they were going to fire you with 0 notice anyways, whether it's inside or outside of control, that's happened to me plenty of times. I've come in for a shift and the front door's closed and I'm like, oh, it's like that today. All right. And then that's, they knew they were going to be closing that day. They didn't tell us.
We were laid off and they treated us as good as they could, but the work itself had not been very satisfying for a while. So I poked around and, had a resume ready. But so I started applying that day, dedicated applying. I had maybe 5 or 10 responses prior to that. But, every day at that point, I was getting up in the morning, sitting down, drinking my coffee, spending several hours, if not the entire day, sending out applications.
How many were you getting out in a day on average? Like, but if you had to pick how many you did in a day.
It really depended on what was available and how easily it was to find. The longer I did this, the more I realized that the vast majority of job boards are reposting from like the big
1 or 2 sources.
Yeah. They're either reposting from LinkedIn, Indeed, or a specific business's core job site. So I spent a lot of time filling out the same application for the same job, but on a different website. And that's why I started keeping track of them, was so that when I opened up a new application, I could search to see if I had applied to it before. But to answer your question, it was usually between like 20 and 60 in a given day.
Because I got, when I saw, and I found you in the comments section in the anti-work group that we're both members of. And I noticed in the language that people were using in their conversations with you, the same questions, the same conversations that people were asking me. And I was looking at it too, and I'm like, well, people were giving me shit for 2 a day. And I'm like, you can do 2 by the time you're done with your cup of coffee, right? It's an online application, unless you're running into the ones where you have to do the personality test and all that. But I did a lot of mine came from like a Facebook ad, because I was doing my targeted, like I said earlier, mine was a spite project. I was already employed. I wasn't even looking for a job at the time. I was just chasing that feeling that something's wrong in this sector. And like, if I picked up a side job, I'd have taken it, because, I am not a wealthy man. And I am not too proud to go work at McDonald's for 20 hours a week if that's what it takes. But, even those places weren't calling, and that's what was like weird. But you are getting responses. And now the range that you're looking at, that leads me into what were you applying for? What's you said you're a little more experienced, so you have like a limit, your living wage for you, so to speak. What were you going for there?
DC has one of the highest costs of living in the country. And
we also, here, I get it.
We also have a pretty decent median income because of that. Our minimum wage is around 15. So, if you're working here, you're generally not doing terribly in a national sense. But, if you live here as well, you might be struggling. I had a minimum that I was willing to accept that was pretty in keeping with the median here in DC. Not even addressing my experience, just the median here.
I can accept this so I don't starve to death. I'll take it.
Sure. And well, it's also just that, I'm recently married and I have a certain expectation of what I think I'm worth. And I kind of don't want to sound like a shithead by saying this, but like between that and the schedules that I was being offered by different places, I just don't owe a business less than that. If I'm worth something, I don't owe them valuing myself monetarily less, but also in a way that makes my real life, my real not at work life, lesser by having a lousier schedule, by
Right.
working
That is
weird
a
hours.
fantastic way to put that. Like, and that's being part of the anti-work group. And I don't know if you're in the no one wants to work group or work reform or any of these other groups that are out there. I'm in a bunch of them because I want to be there. And with this particular thing, the one thing we see is that people just aren't falling for the just suck it up and see if you like it in the long run. Like, sure. We're running from toxic workplaces faster. It's easier to see the red flags. Having done the number of applications you've done recently, and I've done a lot of this stuff too, like you get to where as soon as you flip that page open, your eyes scan and you've picked out the 4 that are just, I'm not going to bother. They're using problem language. One of the things that I found, equivocation in job listings. If they're being vague about what the job listing is going to be and things like that, you don't even bother clicking that button. So for out of the 1,100, 1,200 you got through there, you probably scrolled past 10,000 of them, right?
If I'm being entirely honest, no, because
you just clicked on everything.
I mean, not literally everything, but if I was qualified for it and it could potentially be something, I tried, because they're not going to get back to me statistically. Maybe 2% are getting back to me at all. So why?
Okay, so why not shoot the shot, right? Like maybe that's the thing. That makes sense.
And that's
okay.
In doing these interviews, I found that largely only the ones that were really worth anything got back to me anyway, and
usually quickly, right? Like almost immediately if they were looking for something.
They respond, but the time with which it takes them to actually hold an interview or hold a second interview or get to the offer or whatever, I'm still waiting on some, and I started a month ago.
Well, this is where I find some of the difference between because and the sector that you're applying in is
I'm a photojournalist and video editor.
Okay, video editor. I knew it was journalist was the part I was linking on there.
I think that was something that some people really clung to in the group that we were talking about, is that I'm
doing it for some bigger reason or a story.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm just,
and I'm not. If I'm looking for a job, I'm not writing for a publication. I'm just writing something that I thought other people might find interesting. And I don't consider myself typically a written journalist. I do it. I've done it professionally, but it's not the key thing that I do. I'm a film guy at heart. So I like to, make visuals and edit visuals, but I write sometimes, and so this was just a small avenue. But I think a lot of people really got hung up on the idea that I am a 1950s cabbie hat guy.
I totally, and it's people make these assumptions about you when they're doing a thing. I get a lot. They're like, well, you got to look at my motives. They're like, he's got this website, he's got this and he's got that. I'm like, when my post went viral, I didn't have any of that. I didn't have my real name on my Facebook. Mohawk Joey and Joey Holtz weren't connected, right? I was 2 separate identities until Business Insider called, and I had to either I couldn't do the Business Insider interview as the mysterious Mohawk Joey from the internet, right? I had to make a choice, and that choice, meant that I had to now the 2 things are linked. Now I put my name down on a job application, right? And if they Google my name, now it's like, so people are saying I screwed myself on that, but I'm like, no, I've protected myself, because now any employer that's thinking of pulling any bullshit, if I have to go back into that job market, they're going to look at that and they're not going to want to hire me. And I'm like, good, because I don't want to work for them if that's going to stop them from hiring me, right?
And that is also something that I've found as well, is just the places that would make a judgment call about me based on where I've worked or my personal opinions or whatever. I wouldn't want to work in a place like that. It's a struggle that colleagues of mine have also had. It's, where you're coming from dictates who's willing to speak to you after that. But
and this is in all of these things, if you think about it, a lot of this is what we're fed up with, and 37 years old, and a couple of my friends, like they started doing the thing and they did the hard work and they worked their way up this ladder or that ladder and they're in a better place because of it. And for every one of those people I know, I know another guy that died of a drug overdose 10 years ago, and then everything in between, right? Because every human and every individual's path is different. But percentage wise, those paths are not available to everybody. And even to people who worked the same job 20 years ago, like me and the guys that I grew up working on these boats with, like some of them, they own like their own fleets of boats now. And me, I don't own a fleet of boats at all. And, like I was working in those same places. I was doing those same jobs, right? But it was people's perceptions and the things they put out on you. If someone looks at you and thinks you're not worth believing in, then they're not going to believe in you. I've had bosses like that where, maybe I could have done what you said I couldn't do 10 times better than you if you'd have given me a shot at doing it, right? And that's a thing that I think these computers are filtering out resumes and people. And it's not, they're filtering out keywords, but what they're losing is the opportunity to speak to a really good person that might be the right fit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I've found. One of the biggest takeaways is that mostly this is all automated and there is no person involved. And 50% of the interviews that I have had are through recruiters. So they are being paid to pay attention to this stuff. Now, I understand that an HR manager or whatever is also being paid. The person whose job it is to do the hiring at the company. They're also being paid for this, but whether they do a good job or not doesn't really matter. So recruiters have a little bit more of a vested interest. They are their own box of knives, but
I used to do recruiting actually. So that's funny that you bring that up. I did fashion recruiting in New York City, but I did it from a houseboat in Key West because I live a strange and charmed life sometimes. And just the way that I got that job was out of this world. And I was like, yeah, that's okay. I overheard a phone call and I was like, I want to do that. And then I ended up in that. And because it was a good feeling, right? You're helping people get paid what they're worth. If you're the type of recruiter that's working to help the people, but maybe you're the recruiter that's just trying to help you work for one of the corporations and you're just trying to get the cheapest person in there for whatever. There's those recruiters too, right? We took our clients on both ends were very important to us. We were kind of a niche thing. I liked it like that. And that's sort of what I'm building, what I'm doing now around. Like, in the minimum wage market and the lower end market, but anyone making under $50,000 a year doesn't really have access to a recruiter or recruiting at all or any of that, right? So part of what I want to do moving forward with my experiment is take my knowledge from that field and the things I've learned from going viral over and I only did 60. Like, I cannot wait to see all the numbers on yours, because the people that responded to my experiment after I did mine, and the second thing I did was I asked people to share their experiences with me. And, we can link up on that at some other time and I'll show you those numbers too, if it helps out your thing at all. But I found that like my experience was not only normal, but almost higher up. And like when we got to the end of it, like it's really less than 1% of these listings out there even led to talking to a person, let alone a job.
We discussed a little earlier about like the concept of a great resignation, people just not being willing to put up with stuff anymore. And while I certainly think that's true, on a federal level, they want to talk about how there are more listings and openings than there are people on unemployment, which may factually be true, as in currently on unemployment. But for example,
but how many of those listings are real? Like
there's
unemployment too. There's
certainly, yeah. Well, unemployment. I mean, I don't qualify right now because I got a stipend, so I have to wait out until I'm not being paid that until I'm not being paid severance. So, and that's an odd situation, but
yeah,
I don't.
That sounds like that fancy people talk. You got a severance? I actually did one time. My boss fired me, and I was like, "Bro, my rent's due in 2 days. Like, this is bullshit." And I guilted him into giving me half of what I would have made the next week. And I was like, "Well, I mean, I've had to know, but that was in the restaurants. People don't give a shit. It's there's 3 of you waiting on the other side of the bar, kid." And then not anymore, right? Because essential workers,
people just don't want to do that.
Everyone who could retire early did. Nobody's sending their kids are not going to work at McDonald's. Nobody's letting their kid go work at a fast food place where they're going to get hot chicken nuggets and coffee sprayed on their face every day. Like, nah. I wouldn't. It's crazy out there.
I mean, my friends in the restaurant industry, I think, are just, they know that they can take their skill, and it is a skill, to a place that makes more money. They don't have
and
to,
appreciates them, right? You don't have to sit there anymore. It's like, I don't have to know how to make your chicken tenders. I can make chicken tenders. So I can walk into that kitchen, and whether I'm putting Hawaiian sauce on them over here at Margaritaville, or I'm putting teriyaki sauce over here at the Chinese buffet, I can make more money somewhere, right? Like,
yeah, it's, I mean, and that was my big thing in my time vetting the responses that I got. I really just stood my ground on my principles, and they're pretty limited. I didn't want a bad schedule, and I didn't want to make less than I was already making or had been making. So I don't think that's a lot to ask, but it seems like a lot of places think that it is. So I just had to tell those places no. I've had several offers during this, but I had to, if they weren't willing, if I had to show up at work at 4 a.m, or I had to make 25% less than I was before, I'm not going to do that.
yeah, it's not worth it. It's funny because my stepmom, she actually took a job recently working remotely, and she wakes up at 4 a.m. now to do that at 5 a.m. But she gets to work from home, she gets to hang out with her dogs, and she wants to do it. I'm like, cool, I will be waking up at 9, maybe 10.
Working remotely and getting up that early wouldn't be as bad as
if you had to get up and go into the middle of Washington, D.C. at that time of the morning.
Yeah, take my life in my own hands and deal with 4 a.m. D.C. drivers.
Yeah,
on a bike.
you can drive. Oh, you're on a bike. I was gonna say, or you can get on like trains places, right? But then you're riding trains with people that are on a train at 4 a.m.
They're not even open here.
Oh, they're not. Wow.
The DC Metro closes at I think 11 now, and they don't open till like 7. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah. See, and that's another thing. A lot of the effects of the pandemic that people don't think about,
My wife says 5, 5 in the morning.
Oh,
when the
5 in the morning. Oh,
yeah, she's not going to give me a time limit.
Like 5 minutes. I'm like, oh, okay.
No, not at all. No.
I've been ripping the bong, so I'm,
Yeah, no, you're good.
Oh, yeah, okay, we're done. We're fine. But no. This is a good, and I love talking to people that have experienced this stuff in different places, because one of the arguments I got, well, where are you at? What's it like? Oh, that's Florida. And, I'll either hear, oh, well, that's why, or, oh, well, it can't be. And every single person on the internet, like, because now I'm 6 months from when my thing went viral. And like I said, I expected it to get 5 or 6 likes. And, then it's turned into all this craziness. And these questions, like, when people start typing it, they think like, this is their first time they're interacting with me about this thing. I'm like, but I have had this conversation with 1,000 of you.
Right.
So like, okay, no, I totally get why you say that, sir. And then like, but I'm sorry, buddy, that's not how that works. And
I think it's funny just that we're getting closer to some sort of like class solidarity, but it's always going to be put off by
the people that don't want to, like, they're either resistant to change, or they want to go with the status quo, or they think that like, but if I just try harder or work harder, but it's like, nah, man, that
even people in the groups that we're discussing, like people that clearly are almost ready for it, but they're still willing to ask you, are you sure that you're material for working anywhere and doing anything? And it's
right. And they immediately question your worth or value because you say, hey, maybe we value our worth a little differently than the metrics that you're using, right? I don't have to be, my success doesn't rely on stepping on the backs of the people next to me to get there. Like, I am okay with, I lived a really fucked up, crazy life that put me where I'm at. And instead of saying like, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps and got here, I'm like, I don't want anyone to ever have to go through any of that again. Can we lift everybody up with me, guys? Like, there's two different ways to look at it. And it's, the mass PTSD trauma that we've all faced, like, it's rough. And we really need now more than ever people to stop looking at anything someone's doing and immediately like screaming at the top. They're like, oh, that can't be, and start being like, well, why is it like this? How can we make it better? Right? Like, everyone wants to do all this subtractive thinking and this detractive thinking. And it's like, but I try and just look at ways like, okay, so here's a problem, right? Now, what can we do that's going to be, is this going to add to it or take away from the problem? Are we working towards a solution? Because sitting around thinking of ways that it's not going to work, that doesn't work for us. And looking at our economy here, like looking at the billionaires isn't the place to look for how to pull ourselves out of this situation. Like we have this Amazon win, and I want to say that like that is the David versus Goliath story that everybody that is like leaning towards whether or not this type of thing can work needs to see and hear. Like
he's a like working class presenting person. I don't mean that as a criticism, but the man has tattoos in places that businesses don't want you to have tattoos, and he like dresses in a way that's incredibly casual. And
yeah, he's me. I saw me standing on that podium, like saying, "Nah, thanks for going to space, Jeff." Like we're down here organizing. That was a great line, and his delivery. And I think this is, a lot of people that I've talked to in my stuff. It's everyone who can't figure out these problems. They're looking at it from the top down, right? And it's like, but the people who experience this, you just went through with 1,000. I've been living this my whole life, and then with all these anti-union places and everything. But at the end of the day, like, there's more of us than them, and we've been stomped on our entire lives and like undervalued. And they talk about lazy, this made up word that's made up by business owners that wanted people to be productive 24/7. They're the lazy ones when you look at it. Like they wouldn't know what to do if you told them to get in the car and drive a pizza somewhere. They wouldn't know what to do if you asked them to walk to the register at one of their Walmarts and like run it. Like I don't think anyone with the last name of Walton would be able to run one of those Walmart registers. You feel me? Like, the McDonald's GM isn't going to walk in and be able to put on that polo and actually make a burger. Like those people don't know what to do in there. So they're making these decisions about people's lives, and they're cutting a couple hours here and there on their little checkbox or checkbook. It doesn't matter to them. Those union guys, and this is one of the things that Chris Smalls and the guys at the Amazon warehouse did. The union representatives that they sent in, the union busting people, that were making like $3,000 a week. They were getting pictures of them because they're trying to hide their identity. They're getting pictures of them, finding out who they are, and like right after they're talking to the employees, they're like, yeah, that person was just telling you about how crappy like unions are going to be and how much they're going to affect us. They're getting paid $3,000 a week by Amazon to have that conversation with you. And that was bringing that up was pretty much immediately like, yeah, that's one way to make me not want to listen to those people anymore. And they were using the dirtiest tricks in the book. One of the union buster people was an attractive woman, and the men in the department that she was, doing her thing in, sort of just kind of, simped right up and stood up for her, like, oh no, because of course she loved all of them, or whatever, how that works, right? Because
they hire people for persuasive roles to be persuasive,
right? And that's, first of all, I'm like, where do I get this money? I get accused of like having this agenda and stuff, and I'm like, I have gotten $750 in donations on this project in 6 months, and I've spent more than that on advertising it and putting the message out there to more people, and just trying to like, I'm doing this, all the time I put into this. I'm doing this because I want to, because people need to know, right? Like
people ask me what my goal was in applying to that many jobs, and I didn't know how to. Right? Yeah, I didn't know how to tell them like I am searching for a job. This is not. The article that I would like to finish is a project. It's a thing, but the data was not collected out of some, nefarious intent. I was job seeking, and I came to the conclusion that I might have some interesting insight.
Well, and I think that's from that post, the post, the way it was worded. So people might have thought that like you like went into this to do that because, like you said, the other guy on YouTube did that. And mine, like mine's a half and half. Like I was actively looking for a job, but the 60 places I applied with the 2 a day thing, like those I specifically chose for those 60. I chose under $12 an hour, things that I was qualified. I was aiming at a very specific end of the job pool there. That like, it was a pretty expected result, because that's what happens. And then you look at the signs, the McDonald's is paying $16 an hour, but then the little asterisk that says, if you're doing third shift, right? If you're doing this, And we get to see that in those groups all day, every day too. So I think everyone's jaded, thinking that everyone's just out there trying to make the next big Facebook post or whatever. And it's like, y'all realize that these posts all come from, we actually want to change these things, not just make fun of them on the internet.
I mean, there are very few people that I can think of that do things like that are doing it for any other reason than like trying to bring attention to a thing. Like,
right. Like that's,
no, Facebook likes are not going to like pay your rent or put any money in your IRA. Like they're not going to help you retire. This is not a part of your career. It's just speaking, and sometimes like speaking into a void, but it's speaking with other people because you realize that you have things in common with them. And the idea that people get so defensive about the concept that you might be not truly one of them is just really,
it's like you're helping, but you're not helping my specific way. So we have to fight. And it's like, that's another thing we need to get away from. And I talk to people about this all the time, and I bring it up, and I'm like, if you don't know what the word intersectionality is, look it up. And in the concept, that like, and I grew up to the concept of one human family, like Key West. We got bumper stickers. They've been free for my entire life. And it's just, you just slap those stickers on everything. You get a new bicycle up. It's not a Key West bike till you slap your one human family sticker on it. Right. And I grew up with trans friends and just, this was, so none of this was ever like a question to me. I just grew up with let everyone be weird and do what they want all the time. And so that was good for me, bad for the society that I was trying to be shoved into when I have to live out on the mainland. And it's just, people are going to be individuals. And if we don't find the things that tie us together and keep us rolling in common, and we only focus on the things that divide us, then we won't ever have working class solidarity. But the line that exists there, it's not like it doesn't exist anywhere here, right? It is monetary. It is boom.
Right.
You either make less than $250,000 a year and you're closer to homeless than you'll ever be to Jeff Bezos, right? Or Elon Musk. Like if you make under $250,000 a year, you're a poor person when it comes down to the numbers, but people don't realize that.
And I mean, I've also seen that just politically as a whole, the ruling class, if you want to call them that, like will always agree on everything. And anything that they disagree on is insignificant. It's mostly to keep us talking about how they disagree on something.
Exactly.
But us disagreeing on anything, particularly when it comes to our value or our rights, is to their benefit. It will always be to their benefit. Us bickering amongst each other and not getting along and agreeing and coming to a broader conclusion will always help them.
It's we have to realize at some point that's got to change, and it's changing. People finally had to deal with change, and now it is changing. Now we have enough people that are like, well, if it's already got to be different, if I'm already not going to be able to pay my bills, I might as well not pay my bills on my own fucking time. Like,
yeah, and I mean it's disappointing that it had to come to that, but
yeah, and then their answer is, well, pump up the inflation machine, right? Let's get that going. People had an advantage for a second. It took them a while to figure it out. They're sitting there, and I can imagine like the manatees in the tank from like the South Park episode. They're waiting to see which solution it picks, and then it's, oh, okay, we're gonna hit inflation, and then it's like maybe it accidentally hit two buttons, and that's why we also have a war, right? Inflation, war, and then distract us from the class war real quick. But I don't think it's working because everyone's still talking about it. The groups are still growing in size. The conversation is not going to go away because until we're paid living wages, people aren't going to just forget that they're not going to make enough,
I mean, yeah, when your biggest concern is just subsisting or existing, you're going to be focused on that.
Yeah, people that have never overdrafted their bank account for ramen noodles don't get it. Like, and they'll hear a statement like that and be like, well, then you're just bad at finance. It's like, yes, I chose to be in a situation where 69 cents would totally bankrupt me. You know what? Yes, I woke up one morning and I chose that.
If that were the case, then the finances created from overdrafts would not be as significant as they are. Like,
right. And it was only people who chose
you
to do
believe
that.
that the majority of people in the country are just god awful at paying their most basic of necessities off, then I think it's really easy to figure out that it's a systematic problem and not an individualistic problem. But
yeah, well, and some charts show it very well, and I'll try and put them in when I do the graphics for this. There are, when you look at it, the bulk of banks' monetary income from customers is the overdraft fees, right? Like that's where it comes from, and the majority of credit card earnings is from the interest on the lowest income end of their customers because they have the highest percentage rates, so for all of the debt taken on by all the rich people in the world, they're not making their money off giving the rich people money. They're making their money off of doling out credit to the poor people in a manner that's just heavy enough that they'll default and have to pay more back. And that's, it's predatory.
Institutionalized loan sharking.
Yep. Yeah, but it's government mandated and government approved. And enough of us have woken up to this now that and we're not participating. When they said, eventually, those people will be out of power and, it'll be your turn to be in charge. But those people also stay in power till they're 90. So we have to we can't wait for them to leave. We have to replace them, right? I need to find people that are ready to be when Mr. Chris Smalls there is done with his little Amazon union stint, when done being, now he'll have practice as president. Then let's go stick him in the Senate, right? Get some of these rules changed or something. We need our generation. We need workers in these places. What we don't need is more lawyers and bosses and trust funds, because those people aren't thinking about us.
The only good politicians and billionaires that I've ever been aware of are entirely fictional.
Yeah, pretty much. And even probably, the couple of feel-good stories we hear about, the ones that do exist, that's literally just so we're not thinking about the slave labor or the murder or any of the other things.
Yeah, it's all PR. I mean, we hear about it because they
want us to hear about it, right? That's yeah. If there was something that Jeff Bezos didn't want me to hear, the Alexa Echo robot would, send the kill drones. And actually, I just said, Alexa, send the kill drones. That's probably not a good idea. Alexa, cancel the kill drones. Cancel the kill drones. I really hope that works.
The light just turns off. She's not listening anymore.
I hope not. Oh, all right. Well, if this is it, then this is it. But no, it's really good talking to you. And I think were you ready to reveal that you said you found something?
Yeah, I vetted like I said, about a dozen options. And I had 5 or 6 offers, and I took the one that was willing to pay me what I asked and didn't, keep me away from my family at all times, that had a decent schedule. So, and it, so far so good, knock on wood.
There you go. So you had to put a lot in there, and percentage wise, that sounds about right. Putting out 1,000 before you find the perfect fit. I mean, even more than that, but with a lot of people I've heard that went that far. It was about for some of the longer searches, it was I think the longest one was 1,500, and then that led to one job, right? Because most people's search ended when they got to their job. Some of them, there were a couple people that were yeah, I applied 4 places. I got a job at the 4th one. I'm like, that's awesome. But there's a lot more people that didn't happen for, buddy.
Some of our severance was essentially 2 months of pay, but we're not working. And some of my colleagues that did the same thing that I did just took a few weeks for vacation, and I'm way too anxious for that. What if the ideal job came and went while I was, treating myself to what is essentially a vacation. So they're now just getting around to applying, and I'm hearing them talk about it. And, if on the 3rd week, maybe I talked to all of them. I sent them all a message and asked how's it going? What have you applied to? Have you been picked up anywhere? And one guy said he applied to 7 places and he had 2 interviews. And I was like, how's that possible? And he was like, how many have you done? And I was like, several hundred at that time. And he was like, that's not true. That can't be true. And I sent him a screenshot and he was like, I don't understand. But I think a lot of it was expanded the field with which I was willing to apply. But the job I ended up getting was essentially what I used to do, just someplace else. But I also have found that like the easy apply on LinkedIn and Indeed are almost useless. If you can find that same listing on the actual company's website, it's going to take you 10 times as long, but you should do it there because
then you might actually get seen. Yeah, that makes
sense.
They
don't even bother
people
looking at those. Like from what they send me emails that are just like, here's an update on the ones that have looked at you and the ones that haven't. Like, haven't even read my resume once. And it's the majority of them. They're not even bothering. But I think that brings us to something that we had touched on a little bit, and it's just these companies aren't really hiring.
Right. Yeah, they're just either. And when I did mine, I was positing that it has something to do with the PPP loans and having to prove that, like, you know, they were looking to return to pre-pandemic staffing levels. But it's like also, and in the restaurant sector that I was looking at, a lot of these were in. It's like, you found out that you can overwork the kitchen staff and have half the front of house staff because you're doing everything's to go now. So you're making more money on less staff and you're bragging about it in your quarterly profits reports. Like, why would you hire someone else? Like,
yeah, but
according to what they teach you in business school, like, that would be dumb. So, like, I get why you're doing what you're doing, but you can't do that and also be saying, oh no, nobody wants to work, we can't find help.
I mean, you have to placate your employees by at least pretending.
That's exactly what I said. I'm like, see, oh, I'm sorry, Becky. Like, we're really trying to find some help. Nobody wants to work. You're going to have to do another 70-hour week. And we don't have it in the budget for overtime this week. So you're actually going to have to do half of it at the other store over 30 miles from where you live. Right. Because I've seen that.
And as long as they're
at restaurants,
as long as those good employees are still showing up, it's boiled frogs. Yeah. You just keep
that's why we need Mayday strike. That's why we need worker solidarity, and we need to just people need to, like, if everybody that is underappreciated and underrepresented and underpaid at work all went and stayed home on just one day, just doesn't have to be forever. Nobody's got to, like, because they can't fire everyone for it, right? They can't fire us all, and you can come up with an excuse. They don't have to know you took that day off. Like, you could be the one sick one and then everyone else was, but if everybody does it, right, that's how that works. Like, if only one person does it, they can be retaliated against. But as a collective bargaining unit, right, and from what we learned with the Amazon workers too, you don't have to go to the Teamsters or the any of these people and take their money. Like, and if that type of union is going to work for your field or where you're working, great. But, like, or you just get together with your coworkers and do it yourselves, right? Like, it doesn't have to be, the benefits of the unions that have existed longer, as they have established long-running pension funds and things like this. It's weird because a lot of the anti-union people I know in Florida retired to Florida on their union pensions. So I don't really understand the disconnect, but okay, Mr. Brainwashed Republican, whatever. Like, that's just it's what they've been taught. So they don't know any better. And so I have these conversations with those guys. I'm like, but you literally wouldn't be where you're at without this thing that I'm saying everyone kind of deserves a chance at what you got. You're enjoying it, right? Why? Everyone should have a chance at that. But then that's where you start getting into people's narcissism and their ego that, like, they only got it because they're special. It's like, no, you only got it because you were born 30 years before I was. And so there was still a couple pieces of that pie left to go around. Like, it's what, 2.5% home ownership rate amongst my generation at this point, or the millennials. I'm born in 84, but, like, and the younger you get, the worst chance of owning a house there is, right? Like, it's that number's not.
There's no way, no matter what we made here, there's no way we could own a house here. Like, houses in our neighborhood are twice the size of our 1-bedroom apartment, and they're selling for $1 million.
Yeah.
And we're not on Capitol Hill. This isn't like the nicest part of DC. It's just a part of DC.
Yeah. So I spent a little time in Baltimore, 2012, I think it was. I was sailing up there for the tall ship celebrations. That's probably the next affordable place that if you got to leave DC.
I think a lot of people are already doing that.
That's all my friends in Key West. Like so Key West has sort of the same problem. You know, it's a very compact place, very high real estate values, high tourism, you know, so high cost of living. Everything's more expensive. The houses go for astronomical prices. And I'm in Fort Myers now, so I'm like a 3-hour ferry boat ride or 6-hour drive to get to Key West from here. But I don't. It's a third what I was paying to live there, to be in a whole ass house for what I was paying to live in like a room in someone else's house there. You know?
Yeah, it's always weird to talk to friends who are like, well, I'm renting a house and it's still less than our 1 bedroom, you know. And I understand that the wages are different, but from what I can tell, you know, they might be different, but you have to get it in the first place, you know.
Right. And then there's so many like factors and it's just too much. There's too many barriers. If you don't come out of high school and link up with like another person and get married like immediately, and then both score good jobs, and then put all that money aside for 5 years, you're not going to own a house before you're 30. It's just not going to happen, you know, unless you hit the lottery or something crazy. Like, and for those people like me, pairing off probably isn't the greatest idea for me. It's never really worked out for me in the past. So like, you know, got to take care of Joe. I'm not going to be able to own a house. What am I going to do with the whole house if I did own it? I don't need, you know, my son's grown up. Like, I'm a sailor. I sailed most of my life. I'm buying a fucking boat and just going to sea. Had a lot of fun. I appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to seeing those numbers. Like,
I'll send you the article when it's up.
Okay, and then I'll make sure that link is available when you get it to me for any future listeners or watchers. And depending on what platform you're seeing this on, it's also available in audio format if you're watching on YouTube, and if you're listening to it on Spotify or Buzzsprout or Apple or iTunes, you can see our pretty faces on the YouTube.
You can also see a pretty cat. Hold on.
Oh yeah, let's bring the kitty.
We just adopted her.
Nice. I'm friends with Oscar, the gay dog that got adopted in North Carolina there.
Oh sure. Wait, where was that in North Carolina? I forget.
I want to say Charlotte.
Okay.
And then yeah, so the gay couple that adopted Oscar are super awesome. They're getting him treated for heartworms right now, and he's got a Facebook. I joined up, and I think that's really cool. I'm a big animal advocate myself.
You know, that's the life. That's what
cats. They wake up and they choose violence, and I love that about them.
And this one's pretty.
I got the jam and make you go to work, now work, that pizza boy. I